In 2002, a data entry clerk at LGT Bank in Vaduz was scanning client records into a digital database. Standard work, routine. He had done it hundreds of times. His name was Heinrich Kieber, and before he left the building for the last time, he made 4 DVDs. Those DVDs contained the financial records of 1,400 LGT clients, their accounts, their trusts, their structures, the money they had moved into a principality of 38,000 people, specifically so that no government in Europe could find it. Kieber sold copies to German intelligence for 4.2 million euros, then to Britain, then to the United States. 6 years later, German police raided the home of Klaus Zumwinkel, the chief executive of Deutsche Post, one of Germany's most prominent corporate figures, at dawn. The cameras were already there. The raid had been leaked to the press deliberately. It was a message about what happened when you used Liechtenstein to hide what you owed. Liechtenstein, a country smaller than Washington, D.C., with no army, no airport, and a prince who actually runs the place, had just triggered the largest tax evasion investigation in German history. This is the story of how 38,000 people built the highest GDP per capita on Earth, and what it cost them to keep it. Before the scandal, you need to understand what Liechtenstein actually is, because the assumptions most people carry into the story are wrong in ways that make the real picture more surprising, not less. Liechtenstein is not simply a tax haven in the Alps. It is something stranger and more interesting than that. And the numbers, once you look at them properly, make almost no sense. Liechtenstein has a surface area of 160 square kilometers. For context, that is roughly twice the size of Manhattan. Its population of approximately 38,000 is smaller than the town of Guildford in Surrey. It is one of only 2 doubly landlocked countries in the world, landlocked by countries that are themselves landlocked. It has no airport, no train connection to the wider European network, and no army. The last time Liechtenstein sent soldiers to a conflict was 1866. 80 of them went to the Austro-Prussian War. They came back as 81. They had made a friend on the way home. The country has not attempted military engagement since. Its GDP per capita, according to IMF data for 2026, is $226,809. That is the highest in the world. Luxembourg is second at $158,733. The United States ranks 8th at roughly $90,000. Liechtenstein's per capita output is more than double that of Germany, the country directly to its east, and more than 2.5 times that of the United Kingdom. The country has more registered companies than citizens. As of recent counts, more than 73,000 entities, corporations, institutions, and trusts are managed out of a territory with 38,000 people. That ratio, nearly 2 companies per person, is the product of a system built over a century specifically to attract foreign capital. Liechtenstein has no natural resources, no port, no heavy industry at scale, and borders 2 of the wealthiest countries in Europe. What it has is a legal and financial architecture that the rest of the world has spent decades trying and largely failing to dismantle. Liechtenstein is wealthy not despite being small. It is wealthy partly because of it. A country of 38,000 people can make decisions that a democracy of 80 million cannot. Quickly, consistently, and without the political friction that forces larger states to compromise. The financial system that built its prosperity was designed deliberately and has been defended deliberately. How it got built is the second part of this story. The financial architecture of Liechtenstein was not an accident of geography or the product of one clever decision. It was built over a century, starting with a tax law passed in the 1920s that created legal structures found nowhere else in the world. Understanding what those structures actually are, not in the vague sense of low taxes and secrecy, but in the specific sense of what entities were created and why they attracted money, is what explains how this country became what it is. And it matters because what happened in 2008 only makes sense if you first understand what was being protected. In 1926, Liechtenstein passed a law creating two unique legal entities. The first was the Anstalt, a hybrid between a company and a foundation that has no shareholders, no board of directors, and no public register of ownership. If an Anstalt is engaged solely in investment activities, it pays no tax at all. The second was the Stiftung, a private foundation that allows assets to be separated from their owner while remaining entirely under the owner's control. The foundation's beneficiaries are kept anonymous. The assets inside it are legally distinct from the person who placed them there. Both structures were designed to allow wealthy individuals to hold assets in Liechtenstein with a level of confidentiality that had no equivalent anywhere in the European legal tradition. The LGT Group sits at the center of this system. Owned by the ruling House of Liechtenstein, the same family that provides the reigning prince, LGT is the world's largest family-owned private banking and asset management group. By 2008, it had nearly 100 billion Swiss francs under management. The prince's son, Prince Maximilian, runs it. The bank that Kieber worked for, the bank whose client data he copied onto those DVDs, was not a private institution in the conventional sense. It was a bank owned by the country's ruling family, operating within a legal framework that the ruling family's government had created and maintained. The country's reputation as a low-tax jurisdiction dates to the 1920s. Its standard corporate tax rate of 12.5% and maximum individual income tax rate of 8% made it attractive to holding companies and wealthy individuals. The combination of low taxes, Anstalt and Stiftung structures, strict bank secrecy, and the prince's personal guarantee of political stability drew capital from across Europe for 80 years. By the early 2000s, Liechtenstein managed assets for clients from Germany, the United Kingdom, the United States, and dozens of other countries who had no connection to the principality beyond the money they parked there. The system worked because it was self-reinforcing. The secrecy attracted wealth. The wealth funded the banking infrastructure. The banking infrastructure attracted more wealth. For 80 years, no serious challenge emerged. Then, Heinrich Kieber made 4 DVDs. The DVDs that Kieber made in 2002 did not immediately surface. German intelligence acquired them in 2006 and spent 2 years building cases before moving. When they moved, they did not move quietly. And what followed in the first weeks of 2008 was not just a tax investigation. It was a full confrontation between the German government and a sovereign state that had spent 80 years building a system specifically designed to frustrate exactly the kind of scrutiny Germany was now applying. The scale of what was uncovered was the part that shocked even those who had expected the investigation to be significant. The data Kieber had compiled covered 1,400 clients, 600 of them German. The US Senate subcommittee that reviewed the equivalent American data estimated that offshore tax havens, with Liechtenstein and Switzerland specifically named, deprived the US taxpayer of $100 billion per year. That figure alone reframed the Liechtenstein story, from a niche financial curiosity to a question about the functioning of public finance across the Western world. If this kind of breakdown is useful, subscribing takes 2 seconds and means the next video finds you automatically. Anyway, the dawn raid on Klaus Zumwinkel on February 14, 2008 was the public face of what the German government intended as a deterrent. Zumwinkel, CEO of Deutsche Post, supervisory board member of Deutsche Telekom, one of the most recognizable figures in German corporate life, was suspected of evading approximately 1 million euros in taxes through a Liechtenstein trust. He resigned the same day under government pressure. The cameras outside his home were not accidental. The leak to the press before the raid was deliberate. Germany wanted the footage to exist. The diplomatic fallout was immediate. Hereditary Prince Alois of Liechtenstein called the German investigation an attack on the principality. The planned visit of Liechtenstein's prime minister to Berlin, scheduled for February 19th to meet Angela Merkel and finance minister Peer Steinbrück, became a crisis meeting rather than a courtesy call. Merkel demanded cooperation on the investigation. Liechtenstein had previously shared data with the US Internal Revenue Service, but had declined to extend the same cooperation to Germany, and the asymmetry was now publicly embarrassing. Liechtenstein was simultaneously placed under pressure by the OECD and Financial Action Task Force, which maintained lists of uncooperative tax jurisdictions. The combination of the Kieber affair, the diplomatic confrontations with Germany and the US, and the international regulatory pressure produced a sustained crisis that lasted several years. The principality's entire value proposition, the secrecy that had made it attractive for 80 years, had been publicly breached by one man with a copy function and a grievance. Liechtenstein's response to the crisis was not defiance, it was transformation. Within a decade, the Principality had signed tax information exchange agreements with 41 countries, adopted automatic exchange of financial information under the OECD's Common Reporting Standard, and been removed from every major international list of uncooperative tax jurisdictions. The EU excluded Liechtenstein from its tax haven blacklist after the country implemented legislative reforms aligning its framework with EU transparency norms. The secrecy that had built the system was gone. What replaced it, and whether the system survived the transition, is the final part of the story. The assumption built into most coverage of the 2008 affair was that Liechtenstein's financial model would not survive the end of banking secrecy. If the entire appeal of the system was confidentiality, and confidentiality had been breached, what remained? The answer, and it is genuinely surprising, is that rather more survived than anyone predicted. And understanding what survived and why requires looking at Liechtenstein's economy with more precision than the tax haven label allows. LGT Group, the bank at the center of the Kieber scandal, owned by the ruling family, had assets under management of approximately 335 billion Swiss francs by 2024. That is more than 3 times the figure that existed when Kieber made his DVDs. The shift to automatic information exchange reduced the appeal of Liechtenstein's strictest secrecy products. But the legitimate wealth management, estate planning, and institutional investment services that LGT and other Liechtenstein institutions provide did not depend on secrecy as their sole value. They depended on competence, stability, and the legal infrastructure of the Anstalt and Stiftung structures, which, reformed and made transparent, remained in place. Liechtenstein's financial center now markets itself explicitly as a mid-shore jurisdiction rather than an offshore one. Competitive tax rates, high regulatory standards, EU single market access through EEA membership, and the Swiss franc as its currency. The 12.5% corporate tax rate and 8% individual rate are competitive without requiring secrecy to justify them. The fiduciary industry, the 270 licensed fiduciary companies managing those 73,000 entities, shifted from structuring for tax concealment to structuring for legitimate succession planning, asset protection, and intergenerational wealth transfer. To be fair here, and this channel will always tell you when something is genuinely contested, the question of whether Liechtenstein's reforms represent genuine transparency or a sophisticated repositioning of the same advantages under more defensible labels, is actively debated among tax policy researchers. The Anstalt and Stiftung structures still exist. The beneficiaries of private foundations are still not subject to the same disclosure requirements that apply in many EU member states. Liechtenstein's definition of transparent is not identical to Germany's or France's. But the shift from the pre-2008 position is real, documented, and has been recognized by the major international regulatory bodies. What survived the Kieber affair was the part of Liechtenstein's financial system that was worth preserving: the competent, stable, well-regulated wealth management infrastructure. What did not survive was the model that allowed European executives to hide money from their domestic tax authorities without consequence. The principality made the transition that Luxembourg and Switzerland were also forced to make, and it made it fast enough to avoid the prolonged reputational damage that a slower response would have caused. Here's the part of the Liechtenstein story that almost never appears in coverage of the principality, and it matters because it explains why Liechtenstein's GDP per capita is the highest in the world, rather than simply one of the highest. The financial sector is important. It is not the whole story. And the non-financial part of the Liechtenstein economy is, by almost any measure, more remarkable than the banking. A third of Liechtenstein's economy is industrial manufacturing. This is not a rounding error. In a country of 38,000 people, the industrial sector produces a level of output per worker that exceeds Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and Luxembourg, countries with vastly larger industrial bases and deeper engineering traditions. The reason is the specific nature of what Liechtenstein manufactures: high-value, high-precision, niche products with global market positions that are far larger than the company's home country would suggest. The most recognizable example is Hilti. Founded in Schaan in 1941, Hilti manufactures direct fastening systems and professional power tools used in construction worldwide. Its products are not mass-market consumer tools. They're the specialist equipment that construction companies rely on for anchor bolts, drilling systems, and fire-stopping materials in major infrastructure projects. Hilti has a global workforce of more than 34,000 people, nearly matching the entire population of Liechtenstein, and operates in more than 120 countries. It is one of the most profitable construction tool companies in the world, almost entirely unknown to consumers, but deeply embedded in the supply chains of every major building project. Hilti is the most visible example of a broader pattern. Liechtenstein's industrial companies in electronics, pharmaceuticals, precision instruments, food products, and dental technology are systematically specialized in niche markets where quality and precision create defensible global positions. The result is an export to GDP ratio that is extraordinary, even by the standards of small, open economies. The productivity, gross domestic product in relation to employees, was the highest in the world when last measured against comparable data from Switzerland, Austria, Germany, and Luxembourg. The notion that Liechtenstein is a small tax haven, wholly dependent on financial services is, in the end, wrong. It is a small country with the highest industrial productivity per worker in the world, a financial sector that has reformed itself under pressure and emerged competitive, and a political system, a functioning constitutional monarchy with a prince who holds real executive power, that produces economic decision-making at a speed and consistency that democratic majorities cannot match. The combination is genuinely unusual. It is also genuinely difficult to replicate. Heinrich Kieber went into witness protection, provided by one of the governments whose investigators he had helped. He was wanted by Interpol. His lawyer declined to say which country was protecting him or where he was. Liechtenstein remained on a warrant for his arrest. The country he exposed spent the decade after 2008 dismantling the secrecy he had breached, replacing it with a reformed financial center that competes on different terms. LGT now has more assets under management than at any point in its history. The Anstalt and Stiftung are still available. Hilti is still building on construction sites in 120 countries, 38,000 people, the highest GDP per capita on Earth, more registered companies than citizens, one castle, no army, no airport, and a data entry clerk somewhere in witness protection, who briefly became the most consequential person in European tax policy. Liechtenstein built its per capita wealth on legal structures, financial secrecy, and precision manufacturing, using the advantages of being very small and very stable in a continent of very large and occasionally unstable neighbors. There is a city that ran the same playbook on a different continent, with different tools, against a different clock. In 1990, Dubai's oil was nearly exhausted. Its ruler commissioned a 7-star hotel on an artificial island, announced a free trade zone, and began expanding an airport that barely had international traffic. Oil production, which had once accounted for 50% of Dubai's GDP, contributes less than 1% today. The city that replaced it, port, airline, free zones, financial district, property market, was built almost entirely without the resource that supposedly explains Gulf wealth. That video will show you exactly what the 3 bets were, why one of them nearly collapsed the entire system in 2008, who bailed Dubai out and what it cost, and what the next version of the city is being built on. It is on this channel right now.